Our guest today is Lucas Silva, Philip Knight Chair of Natural Sciences and a professor of environmental studies and biology here at the University of Oregon, as well as the director of the Amazon Sustainability Center. Lucas is widely recognized as a collaborative and solutions-oriented climate scientist whose work bridges ecology, biogeochemistry, and community engagement. As the founder of the Soil Plant Atmosphere Lab here at the University of Oregon, he's built an interdisciplinary program that blends cutting-edge tools like isotopic analysis, environmental DNA, and artificial intelligence with traditional ecological knowledge in order to better understand carbon, water, and nutrient cycles. He's a respected expert, quoted in outlets like Science and the BBC for his research on Amazon dark earth, and he's known within local communities as a dedicated partner, leading projects such as the $3 million CARBS initiative with the Coqual Indian tribe, which is co-designing sustainable land management practices. Through teaching, mentorship, and global collaborations, Lucas is not only an innovator in environmental science, but is also a thoughtful bridge builder between rigorous research, policy implementation, and everyday people. Lucas, welcome, and we're so glad to have you here in studio with us today.
Good morning. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Lucas, I'd love to learn a little bit about kind of how you began your work and how we got where we are today. From what I understand, your work began in the Amazon basin. There are these regions of soil that are commonly referred to as terra preta or Amazon dark earth. So it's my understanding that your team had a breakthrough on what was like the common understanding of how these regions came to be. Could you share the story of that experience and what you learned?
Yeah, the very beginning was actually a little further south from the Amazon basin in central Brazil, where I was born and raised. And my first studies had to do with restoration of degraded areas of Brazilian savannas. There's the most biodiverse savannas in the world, degraded in many different ways. And my first project as a restoration ecologist was to bring those systems back to some kind of functional state. Yeah, They were barren lands for decades. In some cases, they were open cast mines that were abandoned and never recovered after decades of abandonment. And so the first scientific studies I've ever been involved in, still as an undergrad. And in fact, my graduation project for my undergraduate program had to do with designing combinations of certain plant species with certain soil treatments to try to bring those systems back to some kind of functional state. To the Terra Preta story, which has always been a curiosity of mine, those Terra Preta sites are actually very high in nutrient concentrations. They are enriched much more so than the typical Amazonian tropical soils. You know, tropical soils are, in general, very nutrient poor. They're ancient soils, highly weathered, bombarded by the effects of high temperatures and heavy precipitation and so on. So they tend to be deep, clayey, nutrient poor, but highly oxidized oxysols. That's how they're generally called. The predominant type of soil in the Amazon basin is like that. There are many mysteries in tropical ecology, ecosystem ecology, in the Amazon basin in particular, but one thing that we thought was settled was the origin of this Amazonian dark earth, so these patches of high fertility. And what has been thought for decades is that indigenous nations and traditional people working through thousands of years, managing land in traditional ways, combining fire, biomass burning, reincorporation of that into the soil, that human activity created those areas of high fertility that have sustained sustainable agriculture for millennia. And that is a very compelling story, one that we thought was settled, but our team working there discovered new things that led us to revisit that hypothesis or established knowledge. We created quite a bit of interest. We brought quite a bit of interest to the region by in some ways challenging what we thought we knew, and in other ways presenting new directions for how research could go forward.
Would the average person just walking through those regions notice a difference from, 15, 20 years ago when you were doing this research?
Yeah. The beginning of my journey would be in the early 2000s.
Okay.
So, 20 years after, for some of the degraded areas that we began restoring, some of these restorations are large scale. You can picture big trucks bringing biosolids, so, sewage sludge treated from water plants to incorporate in the soil, try to reignite some kind of natural succession process. And yes, so the average person would walk through these places and see a forest, and an untrained eye might suggest that typical a tropical forest that happens in central Brazil, often associated with bodies of water, and we call them gallery forests when they're close to rivers, for example. And but these are not such ecosystems. They are novel systems that came up as a result of that initial intervention, as well as natural succession that happened. But yes, one can see large differences in the amount of biomass above ground, the way the soil looks, tastes, and smells. And there's the whole thing about that combination of beyond visual assessments of in traditional cultures, and have different ways of assessing things like ecosystem health and soil health. They go beyond visual. You hear different bird communities, for example, and so on. So yeah, those restoration sites in central Brazil are like that. In the Brazilian Amazon case, those are more discovery sites, a combination of archaeological sites with paleoecological reconstructions. The sites are not degraded in the sense, they're still ecologically functioning, and they look like forests, but they have this, in many cases, these patches of highly enriched dark soil that presumably were created intentionally by ancient populations.
Okay.
So what we did, and this is much later, this is now early 2010s, or maybe late 2000s. Now I'm in grad school. I'm doing my PhD at the Global Ecological Change Research Laboratory in Canada under Professor Madhu Anand, who is a social ecologist. She's an expert in modeling social ecological interactions and whether a system would shift from one state to another depending on human impact and decision making and so on. So combining social sciences, ecological science, and as an ecosystem ecologist in training, my PhD was in environmental biology, so I was combining environmental data, biological data to understand the function of ecological systems and the climate change, for example. At that time, that's when I began my research in Amazon and dark earths, and curious to know what was the origin of that in terms of what was being burned, what was being added, because there's been decades of research trying to experimentally replicate with Western science that effect.
Like, we know that this is really nutrient dense earth, though how was this created? Can we do this? Can we replicate this elsewhere?
Exactly, yeah. And Brazilian government has this very well-established network of research sites at Embrapa, which is an institution that is represented across the country, and one of their main research stations is located in the heart of the Amazon basin, where they've tried all sorts of experimental approaches to replicate the formation of those soils. And as far as I know, nobody has come close to even beginning to put the thing in the right direction. That made me curious, and I wondered, okay, maybe there's something about what was added that was different. And I went there as a grad student for the first time and began looking at stable isotope signatures that could tell us, whether it's coming from grass or from tree, wood, or something else, and the numbers were not adding up. We found that the materials that were added came from a completely different part of the Amazon basin. Both the organic materials were of an origin that did not match the signatures expected for forest biomass. So it was something else being burned, particularly C4 grasses that should not be there.
These are materials from like a completely different region that have been transported there and burned?
Yeah, transport is a good word, because that's what we think happened.
Okay.
So not only the organic carbon that was found there in this enriched, dark, highly fertile place, not only the organic carbon was from a different place, but also the minerals. So we measured, a variety of mineral elements, and they, again, stable isotope signatures, and identifying provenance in this case. It was almost like forensic science. We tried to piece together what were people doing, what are they burning, how much, and back calculated, try to get to some of the basics of how that was done, and working with social science archaeologists to try and understand the cultural nuances of that all, and what other materials could have been there. Everything from human feces to fish bone to biomass. We looked at all of those things and did what we call a mass balance calculation.
Getting your hands dirty.
Like really, really fun field and lab work. And the story didn't add up. And I sat on that data set for a very long time until I could begin to question that, long held view that those things were intentionally created. It took us a little time and some digging of other of other sites elsewhere to try and match, mix and match, and propose something that was slightly different than folks thought. Which so our new hypothesis for this is that people did understand the dynamics of the system. They did understand disturbance and depositional patterns and so on, and they did figure out those sites. They located them and preferentially settled those areas.
Okay.
And perhaps through indigenous practice, they were able to maintain that long-term sustainable, which is not a thing we see in industrial agriculture in the region, right? Tends to fail out there because it requires a lot of input of materials. So there's a combination here of a story of evolving landscapes through environmental change and massive disturbance, regime shifts, and depositional patterns, and people's ingenuity in figuring that out and maintaining that in a sustainable way. So this adds some, we like to think, a new dimension to the story, one that it goes a little farther away from the ancient European agriculture, which is kind of highly intensive, plot-based, input-based, to something that would be slightly different, but equally amazing, if not more, which is the ability to read the landscape and understand long-term changes, talking about thousands of years of depositional history coming from elsewhere, and using your senses to figure out what sites might be more capable of maintaining high numbers of humans and relatively high densities the way people used to live there.
Wow.
And still do. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm curious because with research beginning in Brazil, I know you've also done some research in the Tibetan Plateau, as well as parts of Mexico, Bolivia, Argentina. What are you looking for? What are you tracking? What are you sensing in terms of like studying a certain forest or landscape?
I have two ways to answer this question. One is the brutally honest way, and the other one is the massaged academic way. I'll begin with the brutal honesty of it. As an undergrad, I did not realize people got paid to go to grad school and do research. And I did not realize that they could travel the world doing that. I was very curious about many other ecosystems. I was curious about other cultures, other peoples, other types of expression and interactions with the environment and so on.
Undergrads listening, take note.
Exactly, yeah. So, for me, one of the big motivators was, okay, can I get some funding to go do research here? In the Tibetan case was a grant from China. I wrote as a postdoc, and I was at UC Davis, and I was funded by the Chinese government to go there and study some of the shifting landscapes they have at the some of the highest tree lines in the world in the Tibetan Plateau. It was an incredible experience. Mexico, similar story, in partnership with folks in California. My first big step really out of Brazil was I was working on my master's with Professor Leo Stenberg in Florida, at University of Miami, in collaboration with University of Brasilia, where I came from. And Leo was a transformative figure, in the way I think about science. He's an artist at heart and very generous with his ideas. He taught me, for example, to not be afraid to share ideas or to step on toes with those ideas. If they're good ideas, they would be tested, and I shouldn't be too protective or too not to be too cautious to explore new directions. And that was a lesson that was really important for me. It didn't come naturally to me. So he helped me see that way, and I try to communicate that to my students. So, he used to say, if you're doing science right, you're always stepping on somebody's toes, and you're opening new doors elsewhere, and so there I went. I was being trained in very specific biogeochemical techniques and stable isotope analysis, as you mentioned, also elemental cycling, carbon cycling, water nutrient cycling. And the thing about this tool that we use, we're literally measuring atoms, measuring tiny things, right?
Okay.
That are everywhere and are part of every ecosystem.
Okay.
So I began kind of training my mind not to look for results that were generalizable or data that would be generalizable, but looking for mechanisms and processes that were generalizable across every single ecosystem.
So you're shifting your thinking into a totally different mindset.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
I was, before that, I was specializing in tropical restoration ecology, tropical ecosystem ecology, sustainable management of tropical system, which is the most diverse, most complex systems in the world. And there was something almost magical about walking through a temperate forest for the first time, and the simplicity of it compared to the overwhelming diversity of the tropical forest,
Yeah.
that I remember thinking, wow, I can actually test some stuff here, Like I see,
Yeah, I can work with
yeah, I
this.
see tens of species, I can
Yeah.
see plucking some, adding others, like actually doing some experimental work in this kind of thing. In the tropics, it's just not possible, or it is, but people do it and they do it well. But for me, it was very hard to wrap my head around the
Right.
many, many, many years that. So
It's like such a dynamic process. No matter where you're looking, you're only seeing like one of the puzzle pieces for the
exactly.
giant
I
puzzle.
mean, undiscovered species being
Right.
revealed every day, of anything, things in the soil, things in, in the understory, overstory. There's a lot we don't know. But then most of the ecological training literature and theory comes from European, North American, scientists and so on. So it's a bit of a predicament there, right? To have the theory being developed in the simpler systems, right? Thinking about the very well documented, discovery or invention of agriculture in Europe and how it spread. People know a lot about that, how it impacted forests and so on. How did those recover or not? Those things don't necessarily translate.
So there's like a lot. Yeah, there's like a lot of in-depth knowledge about North American farming ecology, forest systems, but then there's something that gets lost in translation.
Because some things are just not generalizable, but then
Right.
others are. So I became curious about, okay, so what are the curious, the specific generalizable things we can learn from system A that would also be true in system B, and can we begin to have a more unified understanding of ecosystems, how they function, how they interact with environmental change, climate change. At that time, climate change was not even a settled deal. A consensus was reached. I suppose there are many ways to say this. Probably physicists and climate modelers and other types of experts in science reached a consensus before the broader scientific community. For the broader community, a couple landmark papers that quantify the consensus came in 2013, I think, was the one of the big landmark papers that attempted to quantify the consensus. Beyond that, I finished my PhD in 2011, so I actually had two committee members still pushing back on the idea of human-caused climate change and whether or not that was an issue, and it were legitimate questions at the time, and I remember having to address those. But in that training as a graduate student, I was looking for, okay, so if it is happening the way we think it is, and the way the physicists and climatologists and meteorologists measure and predict things will happen, there may be some generalizable responses that ecosystems everywhere will be feeling, and maybe the response will diverge, but the processes should be generalizable. The mechanisms of response are generalizable. So I became ecosystem agnostic, as I like to say, and which gave me a lot of latitude, literally, to travel up and down the Americas.
Yeah, pun intended.
And writing about things that could be read and understood, by anybody interested in those processes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that a generalized movement within the field to kind of zoom out and see what we can, like what kind of processes are consistent across ecosystems? Or is that something that's unique to the way that you're approaching it?
Yeah, it's funny, one of my most significant recent mentors, I've been very fortunate. I just want to say this before. Some of this was hard work, but most of it was luck and then meeting the right people and then hearing them out and just learning from them how they think and how they do things, and receiving that generosity and training and time and energy. And time again, I was so fortunate to find mentors. And one of my most influential thinkers here, Yuval, and friend, a mentor, that I consult with on a regular basis, Brandon Bohannon, professor of biology, microbiology, microbiologist. He has this sentence that I find it interesting. He says, people looking for generalizable patterns in ecology have physics envy. When I look for,
Physics envy.
Yeah, physics works with two body problems. We have much more complex systems and so on. Sorry, Brandon, if I misquoted you there. But I find that not only funny, but to your point, I don't think it's necessarily a trend in the field. I think some people, maybe more envious of physicists, and maybe I'm one of them. It's interesting to me on the social dynamics of academia. That some kinds of personalities and minds tend to look for more generalizable patterns. Something that might be closer to universal rules or strong rules or universal laws. We don't really have that in biology,
Okay.
Yeah, there's a significant fraction of biologists and ecologists who think that way. Those are usually ecosystem ecologists, like I am by training.
Okay.
We focus on the elements, how that stardust, flows through systems, and what does that do and what regulates that. But it's a matter of training, meeting personality, meeting curiosity. So it's a different scale of thinking. But it's not more or less fascinating than other fields. Yeah.
I really appreciate the way that you brought like mentors into this conversation. I can really relate to that. I'm sure a lot of people listening can relate to that. We're so much a composite of the people who have influenced us. And that one of your mentors in particular kind of encouraged you to share your ideas, and that to kind of trust, what I heard you say was like kind of trusting the process, trusting that if there's something that it doesn't need to be correct at the outset, that will kind of become apparent throughout the process.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of wondering, how would you frame that for the younger generation who are having their own ideas but maybe are not necessarily saying them out loud or don't know where to go with those ideas? What was that process like for you, or what would you want them to know that you learned in that learning process?
Such a good question. I think the first time I felt confident that I had a new idea that could be shared and was worth exploring, I was working under other folks that had their own projects and their own experiments going on. And I remember I was a lab technician at the time, working for Embrapa in Brazil, and I did that gig for many years before I launched into grad school. So I had no linear trajectory to get to grad school. I had some areas that really interested me and others that didn't, So I think first step was to figure out where my heart really was, what I was really passionate about. And at the time, I remember caring a lot about courses I took and training that I had that involved the natural environment and the time scales at which they operate, and everything's so much bigger than a single human life in terms of temporal dimensions and resolutions and so on. So that was fascinating to me. But then I ended up in this technician gig working with folks, and I remember questioning some of their questions and setup and hypotheses. You have this one example. There was this big experiment going on, and people were testing combinations of certain genetically engineering plants and fertilizers. Is a big research station, experimental station. They're developing new soybean varieties that would be more resilient to drought, for example, and things like that. And they were getting these results that did not make any sense. And I remember, looking at the data set and thinking, but what was this plots before they established this experiment? Experiment that's 2 years old, and there was a whole legacy of prior work that had been done in those lands, had been farmland decades before. There was a natural variation in the thing. So they're comparing things that are not homogeneous as the plots and the experiment was set up.
It's kind of like apples and oranges kind of thing.
Yeah, I remember having that thought and say, well, these guys must have thought of this, right? They are the PhDs in the field. I mean, this is the best people working on this. But, they were the plant people. They're not really thinking of the below ground processes in the soils. And I remember having that, oh man, no, this is now, finally talked to some folks. And turned out that that idea bubbled up, and they revised the whole experiment and incorporated legacy effects and did the whole design. They reused the data they had, but it was kind of pivotal for the success of a much larger project. I was just a technician, But if I had not voiced that, I would have not gotten the satisfaction of, I have something to contribute in here. And I took voicing that to a few different people, and just sharing that thought. So I suppose to answer your question, if you have the ideas, looking for the space to share them in a safe way and being thoughtful about it, and and asking for advice on how to think about it. You may say something like, I have this thought, can't be right? How do you reconcile these things? And the thing about curious minds and smart people is that such a question is almost irresistible, right? You put a puzzle before somebody, I thought A, B, and C. What am I missing? I mean, it's an irresistible invitation. And that interlocutor could be a professor, it could be your immediate supervisor, it could be a peer. Oftentimes, good ideas have a way of getting everybody excited and thinking about it, and thinking about it together really gives you what you need in terms of confidence to say, oh, maybe it's just, maybe it's an easy answer, and here it is.
Yeah.
And then you get your explanation, scratch that itch, but maybe, just maybe, people haven't thought about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. That's a really beautiful answer. And I feel like one of the other things that I heard you say was like, there was also that initial step of that, like that moment where it's like, this doesn't make sense. Surely someone's looking at this, right? Like this doesn't make sense. And I feel like for so many of us, it's listening to that voice and trusting that you are seeing something. And so then taking that next step, and that it sounds like you were in a healthy environment, a healthy ecosystem where you could say those things out loud and people would be listening and thinking critically and kind of work it with you.
Yeah.
And to me, like, that's how you know you're in a great environment, is when you can say those things out loud and it doesn't get shut down. It's actually met with more curiosity and excitement, and oh, I might be wrong here. You might be seeing something that I'm not seeing. And that's so much what makes a beautiful educational environment too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We are so lucky to have still have spaces like universities and research institutions where ideas and thoughts and questions, that's the job of those who are there, to entertain such questions and to explore and or explain or try, right?
Absolutely.
But it begins much sooner, I think, too. Like I have kids, and they're very young right now, and I'm often taken aback by their questions. We come into this world as little scientists, little artists. We have it all in us. The curiosity is in there. That is independent on training. Like I have the privilege to work in environmental studies, for example. Where I was hired to be back in 2016, joining U of O. We have folks from the humanities, social science, natural sciences, and I teach classes that includes combinations of these people, and I get equally mind-bending questions. No matter where they come from, there's no, there'll be a difference in language and how one expresses a thought. That's the training. You shape your mind in such a way. You choose words or you reference authors based on your training, but the core essence of an idea, of a question, of a genuine curiosity that is in all of us, and just creating those spaces. So part of it, as you said, is being lucky enough to be in those places, which I was. But my job now, and I think the thing that really excites me the most is the creation of such spaces, in and outside of academia, with partners that have different types of training and maybe deferring to the PhD level trained researcher when making decisions, but they have that thing that this really makes sense. I know this land. My grandmother told me this was done in such a way. Is this a valid question?
Yeah.
And we have very few spaces right now where that exchange, that judgment-free area where you can speak your mind and ask open-ended questions and hear the experts doing their best to try to figure that out. Expertise is just trying to do something many times, failing a lot, and maybe you figure it out. You try. So doing it together.
Breaking down the mystique. It's the official definition of expertise.
Exactly. I suppose we could look that up, but it sounds about right.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I hear you really kind of centering curiosity, and I'm curious about your work as a professor here at the U of O and working with students. And you run the Soil Plant Atmosphere Lab here at the U of O. And I'm curious if you could kind of paint a picture for us of what a day in the life of an undergraduate or graduate student working in your lab might be like.
Yeah. I feel like I may not be the right person to answer this. That's my team. Where are you?
Or just what do you see happening?
Yeah. So we have a bit of a system that I adopted from my own trainings and other labs I've been in and observed and learned under. There's a mentorship pairing system where graduate students work with postdocs or research staff, and or with some of our colleagues. We have, for example, in biology, we have part of my appointment in biology at the Institute of Ecology and Evolution. We have a rotation system. So graduate students will come in and they experience, what it is to be in like 2 or 3 labs, before they declare, okay, I'll be doing,
Oh, wow.
yeah, so
Almost like residency
almost like,
training.
exactly, yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize
Yeah,
that.
that's particular to biology. Environmental studies grads don't quite have that, but then, we have the ability to build a committee, and the students can get advice from multiple PIs, or
Hmm.
principal investigators or researchers, in this, but they tend to, at some point, gravitate towards one place. For those who end up in my lab, I try to pair the grad students with postdocs and the research staff, and I work really closely with my graduate students. Those graduate students then are the ones who really do the most of the mentoring
Hmm.
with undergrads.
Hmm.
And sometimes they have very large teams of undergrads in the field,
Hmm.
depending on the kind of work we're doing.
And your graduate students, are they mostly coming in with like a research project that they're already interested in? Are they, like, what does that relationship
Yeah,
look like?
yeah, it depends. We have been fortunate enough to have been getting grants continuously since I got here. So we often have positions open funded through federal grants, either National Science Foundation or USDA. Sometimes philanthropy dollars. Have donors who care deeply about a certain cause and work that is hard to fund. For example, work in the Amazon basin, which has no American
Hmm.
federal dollars support that currently. So in those cases, we may open positions specific for the purpose of the grant. Then we're looking for somebody with background in X, Y, Z. But in many other cases, that is not how it plays out. Students come in. Sometimes they bring their own funding, like NSF GRFP scholarships, so you can write a proposal to NSF. I usually help students write this on the front end. They'll contact me
Hmm.
ahead of a deadline and say, I'm interested in working in your lab. I have an idea for a project. Let's talk about it. So we meet up, and they write a proposal and then bring their own funding, multiple years of funding. And in those cases, they have essentially more freedom to work beyond the confines of a specific set of goals for a grant proposal, a research grant. And in that case, my job is a little different. It's kind of helping them figure out how to actually execute on testing the ideas they had originally, and how that might connect to other things we have going on, and
Hmm.
who might be a good collaborating lab. We work collaboratively across nations, across biomes and disciplines, and
Hmm.
um, it's exciting to be an environmental scientist these days because, I suppose it has always been a team science, a team sport, if you will, but more so now. The kinds of things we do, measure and try to project and model, they require many, many brains connected together. And,
Yeah.
yeah, and many machine brains now too, helping us crack the code and figure things out. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Multiple people looking at the same problem,
yeah,
you get different perspectives.
exactly. Yeah.
I'm curious, kind of on that thread.
Mhm,
So I've heard a little bit about this project that you're currently working on,
mhm,
carbs,
yeah.
and you have a present or a partnership with the Coqual Indian tribe.
Mhm.
You're also looking at carbon sequestration. Could you tell us a little bit about how that project is designed
Mhm.
and what your objectives are?
It's probably my favorite projects of all time. Still ongoing. It's relatively new. Yeah,
Favorite
yeah,
project?
yeah, yeah. I shouldn't say this out loud. Sorry,
I
other
know, other
co-PIs from previous
projects.
projects. I love you all, but this one is dear, is close to my heart, and because it really came from those ideas that came from out of the Amazon basin.
Ah.
Things. In the study of dark earths, how did people manage fire, figure out sustainability, transport the movement of sediments from forests to estuaries, and what does that mean? The shifting landscapes, what does that mean for social, ecological, cultural sustainability? And the Coquel Indian tribe, we are very fortunate to have at least two, perhaps more, faculty members at U of O who are also tribal members. I have my dear colleague and friend in environmental studies, now in environmental studies and data science, Ashley Cordes. Professor Cordes is a Coquel tribe member and co-PI on carbs. And her focus on carbs is looking at data sovereignty and how can we ensure that the knowledge we generate in collaboration with them remains protected and serves the purpose of the tribe. We also have Chief Jason Yonker, who is the chief of the tribe and also a member of U of O faculty, and they're both involved in this. It's been fascinating to interact with them and other colleagues to try and figure out this together.
Mm-hmm.
So the premise of that project, a big part of it, the part that involves this partnership, has to do with the co-production of knowledge, which means co-production of hypotheses. What is the tribe interested in answering? in the world of carbon sequestration, what are the intersecting areas? We could measure many things in many ways, in many places, but it's better for us to make those measurements in a way that advances other goals as well.
I see. So it's like we could go any direction, but if we're truly meeting in the middle, what kind of hypotheses are going to be genuinely serving the interests
exactly
of all parties involved?
Exactly. It's a large project, which means we can measure many things, but the real impact wouldn't it be nice if we could, maximize our impact in the sense of, providing the data that answer the carbon sequestration questions as well as some practical decision making or paleo-ecological cultural reconstruction questions that may exist. So to go back to the Amazon story, which resonates in this case too, the Coquel have, in my understanding, that they have continuously occupied the area that around Coos Bay, where they still live now for over 13,000 years. I think there's archaeological descriptions of that.
Wow.
My understanding is that it's one of the longest continuously occupied pieces of the Americas.
Wow.
Which means that people have been dealing with environmental change, big changes in evolving landscapes, and you see tsunami depositional profiles and things like that. There have been massive and major changes in the environment over that time period. People obviously adapted and figured out ways to remain there, right? And how did that come about? And specifically with carbon sequestration and transport of materials, what does happen with, say, wildfire in mountain forests, moves a lot of sediment and charcoal downstream to estuaries. Is that sequestered long term? How long does it take to cycle? Does it preserve the signature of what existed prior to European settler arrival and so on? So in working with the tribe, what we heard from them, and there are many constituencies within the tribe, and many questions related to this, but a consistent one that has shaped how we do our research is like, can we reconstruct what the rivers look like in terms of where it was, how the landscape was shaped, what kinds of species were there, plant species, maybe some fish species as well.
Like influx of European.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And
immigrants.
so those are things they are interested in. And of course, they have their own documentation of that and their own stories and records of that. But we now have new tools that could add more nuance to that. For example, the use of environmental DNA.
Could you define that for us? What is environmental DNA?
Yeah, so everything that lives carries DNA, and we'll shed some of that in the environment. And in the case of plants growing in an estuary, that little bits of that DNA will get stuck in the clay.
Okay.
And there'll be layers of that, and you can dig through the soil profile, go deeper, generally speaking, go deeper in the soil profile, go further back in time. And then if you can recover and extract and amplify those DNA pieces from whatever's existing there, so, we can get a picture of what existed.
You're basically doing like real life Jurassic Park.
Yeah, it's forensic science. Yeah.
Okay, all right, sweet, just checking.
Yeah, but this is the kind of thing, we don't do this directly in our lab. It requires partnership with the core facility, the Genome Center.
Okay.
Professor Jake Searcy and in data science is doing the AI part of that. The bioinformatics pipelines to bring the species of DNA together, make sense of them is a gigantic effort, much more so than the sampling of it. And we have Professor Lilian Aoki, also environmental studies and a member of the Institute of Ecology and Evolution. She is a estuary expert, like a wetlands biogeochem ecologist type. So together with the tribal folks who proposed this question to begin with for us was not part of the original proposal. But you built in, it was by design, we had this latitude to do this co-production, and it's been a fascinating process of negotiating, what really matters and what can we discover, and we think we can measure some things. Some things are new. For example, trying to get fish species specific DNA extracted from clay layers in deep sediment. This is a thing that is hard to do. I just heard that we may have positive indications that we managed to recover that, but all very preliminary but also very exciting.
Wait, I don't want to gloss over that.
Yeah.
So this is a process that we weren't sure if we could do before this project, and you just had a breakthrough.
Yeah,
where
that's the kind
you
of thing,
think that maybe you can.
Yeah.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Cool.
You have this amazing scientist part of the team, Karen Adair. She works at Brandon's lab and doing all the bioinformatics of that. And sorry, Karen, I'm naming you here too. Decided to name all my colleagues.
We
I'm
got a whole
dropping
crew in the
names.
room.
I'm just so inspired by the work they do. Every single one of them, and it I feel very fortunate to be able to be bragging about their work here. But this is one thing we're clear with our collaborators and community partners that we don't know if this is going to work. We'll try, and we have some initial positive results from
Wow.
the initial batches of samples that suggest that
Wow.
we could indeed recover some fish DNA from clay layers, and you may be able to then again, it's a possibility to reconstruct some of that fish community and see what it may look like, what it looked like before
Wow.
and after
Mm-hmm.
the changes in the more recent changes in landscape
Okay.
caused by human occupation and or environmental change. Otherwise,
I just need a moment to marvel because I'm kind of getting this like zoom out view of like, here's a project where through the collaboration that was designed into the project, a question arose that wasn't even originally part of the original conception, which then led to a scientific breakthrough that we didn't know we could do before the project came off the ground. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah. Such an analysis has been done before for a couple places, but in this particular context, it'll be a first. You see, the meaning of that is going to be carried and it is going to be derived from the importance that those lands and that river, in particular, the Coquille River, have for the Coquille tribe and their ancestors and the ancestral land. It is crucially important, not because we're getting DNA out of the clay. It's crucially important because here you have a tribal nation with deep roots in the Northwest that may discover something through these tools, rediscover, re-encounter some of the non-human ancestors in that same river basin, and there's beauty in that. We are excited to see how this plays out. Again, these are early stages.
Yeah. Wow. I'm also just thinking about kind of the idea of being a part of a community that's lived on the same land for 13,000 years.
Imagine that, yeah.
Just the stories, the ancestral knowledge, the knowledge of the land that would inform the generation of that question.
Yeah, our goal is to actually learn from them, and not only what they care about, that we can work and publish together, which is, always an interesting piece of the academic work, but I fully expect to have insights on how land could be managed in a more sustainable way. There's a lot we don't know about the way traditional populations did their business when it came to managing the environment, right? And we're discovering more and more about that. There's just the way you think about fire management, prescribed fires, and so on. There's a whole widespread acknowledgement of the importance of including traditional knowledge into ecological thinking. And right, it's not us, are not the only ones doing that. In many ways, we might be behind the curve when it comes to acknowledging and incorporating that. But here we are with, and the U of O is a special place in the sense that my understanding is that the university itself has MOUs or memorandums of understanding or some kind of a formal agreement of partnership with, I think, the vast majority of the tribal nations across the Northwest. And I think that's pretty unique. I heard that from Mary Woods and other folks in the law school who I worked with in previous iterations of CARBs or CARBs-like coordination grants that we used. Essentially, the proposal at the time, the grant we got at the time, was to bring people together, try to come up with such ideas. And so I learned a lot about the UO's role and potential increasing role in connecting with communities, not only indigenous communities, but also, our growing farming community and expanding rangeland managers across the Northwest, right? I think our university is uniquely positioned to really have a oversized impact on that. That keeps us scientists in check when it comes to working on things that matter, and trying our very best to work respectfully and with a shared understanding, a genuine exchange of ideas without the traditional top-down. Here's the science prescription,
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
It's really inspiring because I think what I'm hearing and kind of sensing is that there's so much that we don't know. And that's such a good feeling when you're doing research or when you're on a question or whatever it is. It's like, it can be, overwhelming or, all sorts of ways. But I think in general, we hear it a lot kind of, I think, just in the contemporary dialogue of just kind of already knowing the answers or holding a posture of kind of expertise or that we're very certain. And actually taking this posture of, well, what don't we know yet, is a really different way of engaging with the world. And also that there are people within our community, there are communities themselves that have different types of knowledge or information or wisdom or perspective that's like deeply impacting the way that we're starting to understand how ecosystems work, how land management works. That to me is a really exciting like aspect of what's happening here.
I agree. There's a lot we don't know.
There's a lot that we don't know.
And that's awesome.
Yeah. Absolutely. So kind of thinking about tracing this thread from Amazon Dark Earth, Lucas Silva as an undergrad, tromping around in the southern Amazon basin, and doing work, in forests all over the world, making your way to the Northwest and beginning to do research here in the Northwest and partnering with different communities here. Where do you see commonalities, differences? What's drawing your attention? Like, where are you looking right now as you kind of imagine the road ahead and where the most, like, pardon the pun, but fertile paths of inquiry might be given kind of where we are in the context of climate change?
We spoke a little bit about how climate change affects every single ecosystem, and there must be some measurable, generalizable perhaps responses across them all. But there's nothing like the Pacific Northwest of the United States and the Northwest of Brazil. The twin Northwests in so many ways. There's so many commonalities I see there. For one, they hold vast amounts of biodiversity. The most biodiversity forests and savannas in the world are in those parts of Brazil we discussed. And for the temperate latitudes where we live here in the Northwest, these are the most productive and highest biodiversity forests of its kind in the world. Not only that, hold vast amounts of carbon, vast amount of water, and deep, cultural roots and historical, traditional, ecological knowledge of environmental change and sustainability, and stories untold of how people figure out how to live here and how to understand and love and be part of the system in sustainable ways. I think, unlike in many other parts of the world who have that same potential, we also have the least amount of raw impact and disturbance. And, there's still, for example, very significant carbon sinks. So if you are to enhance or protect the natural climate solution potential of ecosystems, if you can't do that in the Amazon basin in the Northwestern United States, you can't do that anywhere else.
I see. The idea being that carbon sinks are absolutely essential to...
Absolutely essential, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so, I think about commonalities in three main themes. There's the stuff we must protect. So the conservation side, we can think of old growth forests. There's still significant carbon sinks. And, as some of our recent research shows in the Northwest, in particular, H.J. Andrews forests, some of the old growth forests actually more resilient to drought and stronger carbon sinks in the long term than high rotation plantation forests, for example, of the same species, Douglas fir. And so you have recent publications on that, looking at climate fluctuations in response to that. So conserving those high biodiversity hotspots and that also have high water quality protection value, and then cultural value, biodiversity value, and so on. So conservation, pillar one. Restoration, pillar two. How do you go about restoring systems that are degraded and or shifting towards a different stable state, one that is not as a strong carbon sink or not as a strong protector of biodiversity and water resources and nutrient cycling and so on.
Okay.
So conservation, restoration, and the third pillar would be sustainable management. How far can we push the systems to get what we need out of them, say wood or non-wood materials and so on, and utilize that in a way that doesn't hinder its sustainability from an ecological standpoint as well as a social cultural standpoint. And those three themes, conservation, restoration, and sustainable management, they orient the way I think about both the Pacific Northwest research portfolio and the Amazon and Central Brazil research portfolio, in the sense that if you're going to create a system that ends up being carbon neutral, net negative, in the sense they're providing a service for the entire nations or beyond that, the entire regions and entire globe as a significant climate change mitigation tool, We ought to understand how the systems work, how they have changed in the past, how people have occupied them, and what are the limits of what it can do, it cannot do, and how to best become stewards of those regions and those lands. So the themes are very similar. The data might not be transferable or translatable, but the processes and mechanisms are.
I see.
Yeah.
So that's, if I'm correct in my understanding, that's the thread of kind of the time travel work that you're doing, of digging deep into the clay beds and soil beds, is can we reconstruct what is possible? Like what would have been possible, what was actually present, so that we have an idea of what might be possible going forward. Because during those times, are we talking about time periods that were also human occupied?
It can be beyond that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it can be beyond that. In some cases, we don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, in some cases, we don't know. And then the level of occupation vary widely. You can imagine chunks of the Amazon that haven't been continuously occupied, but were transiently occupied, the migration routes and so on. I suppose one analogy that has been useful is an analogy that I use for carbs and for carbs 2.0, which is the Brazil version of it. We can think of generalized medicine, take 2 aspirins and call the doctor in the morning type approach, no matter who you are, no matter where you are, no matter what you eat, no matter your background, right? That doesn't really work very well in humans, and you can translate that thing to ecosystems and say, okay, plant trees everywhere, call me in the morning. That's not gonna work. So what we try to do with carbs and other projects, we try to use a combination of tools that will bring us closer to something that might be as individualized medicine, something that takes into account the baselines, the historical context of specific locations. What do they look like long term? What are their diets in terms of what were the inputs and outputs of those things?
Of a forest. Almost like treating it like you would a sick kid in your office.
Exactly. Forest patches and soil individuals, as we call them. There's a technical term in soil science for that. Recognizing the enormous complexity of that all, and using tools that combine satellite information, AI, eDNA, long-term records, try to bring that all together to do some kind of version of more targeted interventions, either for conservation, restoration, or management of ecosystems. But taking that long-term history into account and embracing the complexity, respecting the idiosyncratic nature of particular landscapes or chunks of landscapes, or chunks of a forest. Like us, those ecosystems are not equal. They're very diverse beyond the species they hold. The specific context, the potential or capacity to be a sustainable carbon sink, for example, or a sustainable water provider, that varies drastically across, even within single landscapes. So generalizable solutions are not going to get us out of the jam we are in now in terms of helping ecosystems thrive under a changing world.
Wow. Thank you so much, Lucas. I have a quick fire series.
All right.
You up for a quick fire?
Well, I am, yeah.
All right. Here's our quick fire. What's the coolest plant, animal, or microorganism of the Amazon basin? In your professional opinion.
Such a difficult one. I'll have to say it's it's going to be fungi and the incredible diversity and everything we don't know about it, and how they might be connecting many rhizospheres and doing its below ground communication and shuttling of elements. Yes, I wouldn't pick even a broad category within that. There's a lot we don't know that, and I think microbial ecological work and the basin, I think will prove to be transformative to our understanding.
Wow, cool. Okay. What is one truth that you wish the general public understood about how ecological restoration interacts with climate change?
That we can't really restore a system back to any specific idealized state. And if we try to do that, we are essentially short-circuiting what would be a natural process of succession and the emergence of what may be called novel or new combination of species. A system that has been degraded enough to not recover on its own will more likely become a sustainable system again if allowed to harbor a new combination of species and do things slightly different. Thinking back of the open cast mines, abandoned mines in central Brazil. Those systems that came after the restoration projects took place. They were different, both from the native forests. I mean, they were still native species, and some invasive species occupied as well, but they were neither native forests or native savannas. There was something new. There was something else. They were human.
We're not trying to go back. We're actually we're allowing for emergence to occur and go somewhere we haven't been before.
Exactly. Yeah, you wanna reignite succession in ways that will become a sustainable process. But yeah, the idea of trying to bring something to a pre-existing state or an idealized state by whatever measure, you choose your date, go back to 1500, back to 1850 or so on. That is less likely to be successful than taking a novel systems open-ended approach where we try to restore for the function.
Okay.
Yeah.
What keeps you motivated in your work?
Coffee.
Great. Who has most influenced your work, and is there anyone else that you want to give a shout out to?
Well, recently it have been my kids,
Aww.
but I mentioned many of my mentors throughout this process. I think I'll leave it at that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for young scientists today?
Recruit a mentor. There is something irresistible about, and I think some psychological social science will show that something irresistible about the idea of somebody coming up to you and say, "Hey, this that you do is really cool. Can you show me how it's done? Can you show me how you do it?" I really appreciate that. It might be hardwired because we evolved as a social species. We have our very existence depends on sharing and passing knowledge and finding genuine appreciation and genuine admiration, something that somebody's doing, and voicing that, naming that, and then asking, how might I learn to do that? I think that's life-changing. It was for me. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lucas.
Thank you.
I'm thinking about closing our time together with a poem.
Oh, that's great.
So this is a poem called Don't Wait by Kim Stafford. And these poems were written to celebrate a conference that the Global Studies Institute put on in 2024, the Don't Shoot the Journalist conference about journalistic freedom. And these are poems for journalists in danger. Don't wait. Don't wait to solve it before you begin. Don't dissolve into sorrow before you taste joy. I mean rain. I mean tears. I mean star milk. Don't stop when it gets hard. I mean confusing. I mean distracting. I mean impossible. Don't you know you are here to do the impossible? It is your destiny to do what's impossible for anyone else but right for you. When it's over, you will see it was easy. I mean, it had to go this way. I mean, when you struggled, you were most alive. I mean, when it was impossible, you were dancing all the time.
So beautiful, huh? Art is the mother of science, no doubt about it.
Lucas Silva, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Emma. Pleasure.
Thank you to our student producer, Ellie Johnson. Thank you to the director of the Global Studies Institute, Ellie Vandergrift, and our GSI team members, Megan Bogart and Hadil Abdelmaid. Thank you to Dean and Vice Provost of the Division of Global Engagement, Dennis Galvan, for your support and your encouragement throughout this project. Thank you to Sam Para for your work on the podcast artwork, as well as marketing and communications support. Thank you to our sound design and audio mastering interns, Journey Brinson and Julian Green. Thank you to the SOJC production studio, especially John Sharpie. Major thanks to composer Joe Kai, who composed our Global Hearth theme song. Many thanks to John Bologna, Charlie Dietz, Steve Rogers, Christopher Deredix, Peter Laufer, and Chris Chavez, and the Don't Shoot the Journalist team for concept development support. Thank you to former Oregon Poet Laureate Kim Stafford for your beautiful poetry. And most of all, thank you to you, our listeners, for your time and your caring attention. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can follow us on social media. We'll link it in the show notes. Please send any questions or comments to gsi@uoregon.edu. That's gsi@uoregon.edu. We would love to hear from you. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again at the Global Hearth, same time next week.